Good morning. My name's Dr. Stephen Greene. I'm a clinical psychologist currently living in Custer, South Dakota, but for 15 years or so I lived in Vassalboro, right down the street from the Criminal Justice Training Academy. Got stopped a whole bunch of times on the way home. Kind of got a heavy foot. Grew up driving in Massachusetts, which probably says all I need to say. I'm going to give you a brief overview of the day, and I'm going to talk about, my part of this is talking to you about trauma and healing and recovery from the perspective of the autonomic nervous system. So in terms of the day, started off with opening remarks, and I'm going to do an overview. And then we're going to have Jennifer from University of New Hampshire report out on the research that they did with a police wellness study that they did. And then Karen's going to talk about trauma so the morning, the first half of this is talking about trauma. Second half is talking about treatment, about recovery and health. And so Karen's going to talk from a cultural perspective in terms of the culture of law enforcement, first responders, military, but for this specifically to law enforcement, and to folks dealing with child sex crimes and trafficking. And then Celia's going to talk from the perspective of the nervous system, from the perspective of the brain, trauma from the perspective of the brain. And then I'm going to talk about trauma from the perspective of the nervous system. Then we're going to have lunch, or we have lunch, then Celia does her part, and then I do my part. Then we're going to do a break, and then in the afternoon, the latter half of the afternoon, we're going to talk about health and recovery from the perspectives of culture, brain, and nervous system. But for a moment, I want to talk about larger cultural issues. Karen's going to talk more specifically about the more microculture, and I want to talk a bit about the macroculture. So I've been a clinician for about 46 years, and if you're awake and living in this world, you know there is a sickness moving through our world, and the current times are best evidence of it if anyone doubts it. Our world was traumatized by COVID. There are two conditions that create trauma: overwhelming fear and inescapable. When you have those two conditions, it can traumatize the nervous system. So if you think about the experience of COVID, for many of us, there was overwhelming fear, and there wasn't anything we could do about it. And we became afraid of each other. We became dangerous to each other. So what would typically anchor and settle us, our connections to each other, which we need for health, that became a cue of danger too. So our world's been traumatized. Prior to COVID, we weren't doing all that great either. There's massive political divisions, violence, hate of all kinds, anti-Semitism on the rise, war, shootings, defund the police movement, which must be really thrilling for you all who serve us, and then to have some of us saying, oh no, we don't need you, let's cut your funds. And then you go out and serve us. Kind of a little bit of a catch-22, I'd imagine. Political correctness run amok, and most relevant for you all, for me as a parent and a grandparent, that there's this illness moving through our society, through our world, the hypersexualization of children. And it is happening on all kinds of fronts. And this is an illness. So this is the context within which you're all operating, we're living. And for many people, they adapt to all of this with an on-off switch. That all living organisms have to adapt to survive. And so for many people, the way they deal with these overwhelming experiences and overwhelming emotions and energy is to just shut it off, compartmentalize, put it in a box, turn it off, which works. It enables you to do the really difficult stuff you have to do. And then when you got to get back on task, you got to move back into work, you just turn it back on and boom, you're off and running. But that on-off switch gets in the way for a lot of people of being able to do other areas of their life, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So one of the things we're proposing, we're inviting you, is to learn to develop, in addition to your on-off switch, none of us are proposing you take away your on-off switch. And if you do this work, you won't lose your capacity to turn it on and turn it off. What we're proposing is that you add a dimmer switch to your system, to your toolkit, that you enable yourself to turn up just enough of what you need to feel and notice in your body and in your mind to be able to begin to metabolize what you've experienced. You've all heard the phrase, stress kills, and really, more specifically, non-metabolized stress kills. You can metabolize stress. You can metabolize trauma. You can metabolize memories and experiences so it moves through you, passes through you, and you're not carrying it. You haven't added it to all the baggage that many of us already have. The ability to use a dimmer switch to increasingly feel a little more, to notice a little more of what you need to notice in your system, enables you to stretch and expand your capacity to tolerate and to feel without getting overwhelmed. When you get overwhelmed, your nervous system and your brain shut down, and there's no processing. Now you're just more in a survival state, a survival mode. But increasingly, with the dimmer switch, being able to be a little more present, notice a little more, cry if you gotta cry, connect when you can connect, sleep when you need to sleep, walk in the woods when it's good for your nervous system to walk in the woods. That ability to turn it up and turn it down allows you, one, to learn to be able to tolerate what you need to integrate trauma and to tolerate and experience stress differently. It also enables you to live other aspects of your life differently. So one of the concepts, one of the ideas we're presenting is inviting you to learn to put a dimmer switch in addition to your on-off switch. As a training team, it's been an interesting process meeting and working together and trying to reconcile our different views on the world and on our work. One of the very early concepts that came up in our discussions was one of the barriers for a lot of folks who do what you do to getting help, that we recognized that what came up was this concept of operational readiness, and that's critical to your all survival. To be able to be on your game, to do what you need to do, to focus, to not get distracted with emotions, to not get overwhelmed, to be able to be present in, I work with military pilots, and their struggle one of them said to me, there is no allowance for fear in the cockpit, zero. And at the same time, they're trying to integrate past traumas into their lives and be able to stay safe and do what they need to do in the cockpit, but when they're done, to be able to come and be present in their life and heal from trauma and not be dying inside from all this stuff that they're carrying. So we recognize operational readiness is critical, number one. And that for most of you, you've learned how to do that, you focus on the job, and you focus on work, and you get the job done. But for many people, the way you've done that and adapted gets in the way of what we're talking about, that you have three missions. So mission one is work and job. Mission two is home, family, and relationships. We are biologically wired to connect. It is a biological imperative. Just like sleep, food, shelter, we have to have those to survive. Connection is another biological imperative. Little kids who are an early study in the orphanages in Ceausescu. Where was Ceausescu? Romania. The orphanages in Romania. Millions of kids, parentless, were left, and they had minimal staff to be able to care for them. And one of the things they saw was failure to thrive. These kids who weren't touched, who weren't connected to, or weren't interacted with, they were basically just left. They were fed, and they were housed. And some of them died. Some of them developed severe disabilities. And it was all because of not having human connection and contact. We need this for our nervous systems, for our survival. It's what children need to grow up. So mission 2, we're suggesting, is being able to develop the skills that you need as much as you learned in training to do the skills that you needed for mission 1. We're suggesting that you develop the same mindset of skill and training and attention to mission 2. And we're also suggesting mission 3 missions. Mission 3 is self-care. Self-care, focus on your own health, finding a balance between the 3 missions. Many folks in your field do mission 1 very well, and that's where you put your time and attention. But mission 2 and mission 3 suffer. So we're inviting you to pay as much attention, to learn as much as you can, to enable you to do all these 3 critical missions really well in your life. Since the name of this conference is Courageous Resilience, I wanted to just talk for a minute about resilience. And using a definition, the ability to recover quickly from illness, change, or misfortune. The property of a material that enables it to resume its original shape or position after being bent, stretched, or compressed. The act of leaping or springing back. Resilience, from the perspective of the nervous system, is a well-tuned nervous system can move in and out of all the states that we experience and not get stuck. Well-tuned nervous systems are flexible and adaptive. When you need to jump into action, you can do it. When you don't need to be in action, you can step back, you can settle your nervous system, you can be present, you can be engaged. When you need to sleep, you can sleep. When it's time to love, you can love. When it's time to play, you can play. And when it's time to kick into gear, you can kick into gear. A flexible autonomic nervous system, which makes the brain work better too, enables you to flexibly move through whatever states your situation demands. Ill-tuned, traumatized, chronically stressed nervous systems are rigid, and you get stuck. You get stuck in states, and then you can't move out of them, and you can't think your way out of them. Our society predominantly focuses on thought, on left brain, on being able to just change your mind, feel better, stop thinking about what you're thinking. But that doesn't recognize that all this stuff is really first and foremost happening in our body, or it is also happening in our body. Celia and I are reconciling together brain and body stuff. That when my body gets activated into a rigid state of defense or protection, I can't just think my way out of it. And a lot of people think that there must be something wrong with you if you can't just snap out of it, if you just can't think your way out of it. But it's a nervous system issue. Resiliency comes from a flexible, adaptive nervous system. So I'm going to quote for a minute one of my favorite philosophers, Yoda. I learned a lot from them. So you all deal with really dark stuff. The folks who are not here today because they're responding to this horrible tragedy here in the state are dealing with really, really dark stuff. And as Yoda says, when you look at the dark side, careful you must be, because the dark side looks back. Everything is energy. Everything in existence is energy. If you look at this down at a microscopic quantum physics level, this is not solid. This is not solid. It is moving. It is energy. And we affect each other with our energy. We absorb energy, dark energy and light energy. So Yoda's talking about that when you spend so much time in the dark, you can get lost in the dark. He also says the dark side clouds everything. It's impossible to see the future it is. And the reason is, when you get shifted in your nervous system into a state of threat or defense or protection, there's a thing called the focus of consciousness, that when my brain perceives a threat, it will narrow down the focus to that threat, and it will not allow me to stop and smell the roses and to enjoy something and to look at the sunrise or the sunset. It won't allow it. It will force me to focus on the threat and stay focused on the threat until it is resolved. So there is no future when I'm focused on the threat in the immediate moment. Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. Later, Celia is going to talk about neuroplasticity. The brain changes with experience. Neuroplasticity is that essentially the brain is plastic. Different experiences change how our brain and body function. What we focus on gets stronger. What we stimulate gets stronger. If I repeatedly am in a defensive, protective state in my nervous system and I'm stimulating anger or fear or anxiety or worried, those pathways get really strong, and then I get stuck in it. In a dark place we find ourselves, and a little more knowledge lights our way, and that's what we're offering. We want you to understand how your brains function, how your bodies function, and the cultural context within which you all operate that both can cause trauma, but are also places where we can change, heal trauma, and heal chronic stress. To be Jedi is to face the truth and choose. Give off light or darkness. Be a candle or the night. Again, what we stimulate gets stronger. The more you stimulate light, calm, peace, love, connection, that gets stronger. The more you stimulate shut down, withdrawn, anxiety, anger, worry, blah, 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 that gets stronger. And our brain can move from one to the other. So if I learn to really start stimulating this other stuff, I can make that more predominant in my nervous system. So I appreciate your time. We're going to now pass this on to Jennifer, who's going to report out on the police wellness study.